But then because they're not getting it right, you don't let them do it. So it creates these cycles that at a certain point just gets too much. And that's this very founder's mojo that got the business started at a certain point is what strangles it and keeps it from growing.
Busy, busy, busy. We are all so busy. And that makes it really easy to come up with excuses not to do the work that's most important to us. Because that's also usually the work that's scariest. I'm Susan Bowles, and you're listening to Break the Ceiling, the show where we break down unconventional strategies you can use to save time, boost your profit, and increase your operational capacity. Now, we've been talking a lot lately about all the ways that founders get in their own way and the practical tools you can use to get out of your own way. I talked to Michelle Warner about the power of process. I talked to Tanya Dalton about the power of prioritizing. I talked to Agnes Kowalski about the power of dealing with your money stories. I talked to Nicole Lewis-Keeber about the power of letting go of perfection. And last week, I talked to Jason Van Orden about the power of patience. And today, to wrap up our series, we're tackling procrastination. It is probably the most common way that founders, business owners, and really just about anyone trying to do anything gets in their own way. My guest today, Charlie Gilkey, helps people start finishing the stuff that matters. He's the founder of Productive Flourishing, author of the book Start Finishing, and host of the Productive Flourishing podcast. Charlie and I tackle not just getting out of your own way, but also how to get out of your team's way and how the stage in your business affects the roadblocks you'll run up against. Hey, Charlie, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Susan, thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
So you have a concept in one of your books that you call Founder's Mojo, and I think that speaks exactly to this entire theme of founders getting in their own way. So can you tell me a little bit about Founder's Mojo and how you see that impacting businesses?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And I kind of want to start with where I came up with it and why I had to sort of like give it a name, is because as I was working with so many small business owners, I kept having to explain to them, like, look, the way you think your team should be behaving and the way you think everyone around you should be happening is not the way that that's probably going to happen. You're special in this way. And so I started calling it Founder's Mojo, which is just, that amalgam of like intuition and vision and experience and drivenness that just lets founders do what they do. Small business owners do what they do. And you got to think about it this way. No one else in the business besides the founder at a certain scale, at a certain stage, kind of knows and can see all of the parts at the same time. They know the strategy, even if they haven't articulated it. They know the cash flow needs. They know the marketing. They just got off of 3 calls with their clients, so they know exactly what people are saying. They know their peers. All of this embedded knowledge in the founders and that drive that, you wake up in the morning, assuming you got to sleep, and thinking about the business, right? Thinking about what you're going to do. And we founders will project that onto the people around them, right? Their teammates, their VAs, their sometimes their clients, because their clients aren't responding and aren't doing things on their time scale. So that's really what it is. That fundamental spark and connection of vision, drive, knowledge, instinct, intuition that really centers on the founder. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that's actually kind of the core at what we're talking about here, is that in your reference, it's talking about all of those really unique, powerful characteristics about the founder that brings the business success. And also, as our businesses tend to pick up all of our own idiosyncrasies and the idiosyncrasies of early members of our team, and the business starts to kind of embody that, sometimes the weaknesses or the blind spots that we have tend to become blind spots or weaknesses in the business. And so I think they're really interrelated, at least in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because at a certain point, founders have to be functionally delusional. In the sense where you have to sort of look at the business landscape and know how many people fail and it doesn't work out, and know all the ways that it happens, and still believe that you're going to be the one that's successful, right?
Yeah, you have to be an optimist.
You have to be, and in a delusional sort of way, because if you looked at the statistics, right, any single one of us should not make it. And yet some of us do. And so we have to believe that we're that one, but we also have to know that everyone else thinks that they're going to be that one too, right? And so that's where there's delusion. And I comment on that because it takes a lot of courage to start a business. And in some ways it takes a lot of just courage and perspective and grit to look at all the naysayers and look at all the people who question and look at all the people worried about you and thinking about, like, shouldn't you go get a job, and say, you know what? I'm doing this thing. And then as, you know, your business and your business efforts start to validate that hunch that you have to sort of hang on to that. And to your point, Susan, you hang on to that, you grow the business, you ratchet it up to another level of success, which confirms your bias as a founder that you were right. And that you knew what you were doing. And then you ratchet it up again, which confirms that. But what we often can't see is that blind spot that in our businesses, we are creating snags. We're creating bottlenecks. We're creating culture in a way that we often don't think about. And I'm going to pause here because I think a lot of small business owners and founders don't think about in terms of culture, business culture that they're creating, but we in fact are, because teams have culture. At a certain point, those bottlenecks, those very unique ways of seeing things, that the pattern by which you become the smartest person in the room about all the things, such that you don't realize that you're kneecapping your team's ability to actually become smarter than you and be able to run the business. So they continue to turn to you, which pisses you off. But then because they're not getting it right, you don't let them do it. So it creates these cycles that at a certain point just gets too much. And that's this very founder's mojo that got the business started at a certain point is what strangles it and keeps it from growing.
Yeah, I love that. So you talked about kind of creating that bottleneck and not trusting your team. And in your book, you also mentioned like 5 ways that you see business owners stifle their own growth. And I imagine that's one of them. You know, can you tell me a little bit more about how you see kind of that founder's mojo, those unique things starting to really impact their growth?
Yeah, well, the first 2 are very heavily interlinked, and they're the Bootstrapper mindset and the Bootstrapper habit. Right. And I always separate mindset and practices because sometimes, those will often diverge. But the Bootstrapper mindset is just like, if it needs to get done, like we do it, I do it, right? I know how to do it, so I'm going to do it. We sort of project that onto our teams as well. Like if something needs to get done, they're going to do it. But we get this very sort of like, it's all on me mindset. That then leads to the habit that we don't even think about, say, delegating. We don't even think about talking to a marketing strategist. We don't even think about some of those types of things because we are the solution for every problem we have in our business, because that's what it means to be a bootstrapper. It's all on you. And those 2 put together leads to a situation to where, the bootstrapper, the founder is like, I see a problem, I'm going to fix it. They immediately start fixing it. Then we get frustrated because the people that we bring onto our team don't see the problem and they don't fix it, right? And so it reinforces this habit that if there's something wrong, I got to fix it. And so we end up in that loop. We sort of go into the third way we stifle business growth, which is, I call it the having to sort through the bucket of marbles. It's like any given challenge in the business, there's 1 or maybe 3 core issues in there that really does require the founder to figure it out. But it's those marbles are in a bucket of other smaller marbles, like, where did an invoice go? Or did someone respond to this email? Or did you make that phone call? And why is the sauna not working today? And just all the things. So every time you go in there and just try to find that one thing, you touch all these other ones. And then because you have the bootstrapper mindset, you start getting in there and fixing them or wondering, and it's like owning a problem that's not yours. And the thing about it is okay, in this specific instance of you answering this specific email, you're upside down. But keep in mind that by not building this process, by not building this delegation and workway in your team, you're committing to answering those types of emails for the remainder of your business life, right? And it's not just that it's one email. It's not just that it's one call. It's not just that it's one thing. It's like we're all buried under a heap of 15-minute to-dos. So the fourth thing you sort of roll into is the insufficient trust. And I have to be careful here because trust is a loaded word. It both means the sort of the moral trust, lie, cheating, stealing, that sort of thing. But it's also just trusting in the sense that if someone says they're going to do something, that it's going to get done or that it's going to be done well enough. And so I want to place it more on their teammates' ability, more so than their teammates' character. If you got a character trust issue, that's a completely different issue than if you have a ability trust issue. And because of Founders Mojo, and hopefully I'm showing, if this particular discussion sounds very circular in the sense where it's like, because this happens, and then this happens again and again, that's actually because I'm trying to describe what happens, right? It's not just that I'm talking in circles here.
That's absolutely what happens.
Right.
Is it always ends up circling back to some other issue.
Yeah. And so because they've got the bootstrapper mindset and they're like, it's on me to do it, so I'll do it. And that creates the habit. And then they're always touching everything so that they're always fixing something. Basically, their teammates around them don't learn how to do the things that they learn how to do. And they can't do it. And so it ends up creating this insufficient trust cycle because they won't even delegate or ask their teammates to do anything because they don't trust that it's going to get done. So what do? They do it themselves. Right, and get ever better, and get ever stronger in their founders' mojo, and leave their team ever further behind. Once you sort of can work through some of those to where you get out of this bootstrapper mindset and you get out of the habit, you figure out what your core work is as a founder and how to trust your team. That last sort of snag that I've seen founders do, and this is a very counterintuitive one for so many founders and small business owners. Once you get to the point to where your team is already doing stuff for you and, the business is working and things like that, the thing that immediately comes up for so many of my founders is if I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, like what will I do? What am I contributing to the business? Like I can't have all these people out there working and I'm not. That just doesn't. And when I say it that way, to be honest, most of you listening who are small business owners, you're like, but isn't that the dream, Charlie? And I'm like, that's what we tell ourselves. But in practice, what we do is end up getting in the business and creating crises, creating challenges, creating frictions, or destroying the business so that we will have something to do.
That's so true. I see that a lot in, it was interesting. So the last professional position I had was as a CFO, and I was turning over my work to my replacement when I left. And we were having a discussion about what do you do day to day? And really my role, I had a lot of direct reports. They all were, doing their work. The style, I know you're prior military too, so I'm sure you get this. The best thing I learned from the military was how to delegate things and to delegate things. And we were talking about, what do I do every day at work? And I was like, I really don't do anything. I sit in a couple of meetings, but my job is to make sure that the people who work for me have the tools and resources and support to do their job, and I get out of their way. That is literally how this happens. My day-to-day is not doing much, except occasionally putting out a fire.
Yeah. I think people underestimate how much work it takes to get the hell out of the way.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
Yeah, and for me, the switch that I had to make mentally was building space in my own brain for part of my job is mentorship. And part of my job is to develop my team and make sure that they have the skills to do what they need to do. So sometimes that is, they come into the office and like you said, that's giving them tools, asking questions so that they can learn kind of the framework that you would learn to solve the problem. They can actually step through that themselves. And maybe you spend the first time, walking them through the process, and maybe you spend the second time walking them through the process. But once they've been through it a few times and they understand that they are empowered to solve that problem on their own, and now they know how to do that, then it's less of an issue the next time because they'll just start solving the problems themselves. And depending on the person, that process takes a little bit longer for some than others. But the switch I had to make was that is a core part of my job as a founder or as a leader, is that my job, when you're talking about like, what do you do all day? If you're not actually in the, sticking your fingers in the business, your job is to sit there and be a mentor and develop your team. And that was one of the ways that I managed to kind of get my fingers out of the day-to-day.
Yeah.
Or the temptation to get out of the day-to-day, because I could tell myself I was still doing something.
Yeah, I'm still adding value to the company. See, but that's where I want to really hang out in this space a little bit, if we may, Susan, because
yeah, sure.
What that drive to contribute and to do something and to create value, I think fundamentally like confuses how we should be thinking of ourselves as owners of a business. So regardless of whether you're an S Corp and how you do your pay or your wages versus dividends, but like there's a part of the value that you create from doing the work in the business. In the earlier stages of your journey, a lot of your value comes from the work that you do in the business. The longer your business works, it's not the work it's not the technical work. It's not sort of the working in the business, to use the sort of well-worn Michael Gerber sort of things. It's how you work on the business. But I would take it a little bit more how you work on the business through your team. And in a later life cycle, the healthier businesses, the best founders are the ones that are doing what seems like the least work, right? If your business can survive for 2 or 3 months without you, besides a random phone call here and there, because there's this sort of edge case, that is the value that you've created. That is the value that you created, not you button seat time sitting in an office pining away for something to do, or pining for some way for someone to tell you good job, or pining for like your sense of contribution in the world. Because we got to remember, businesses should serve people, which by extension, businesses should serve their founders and owners. And unfortunately, Susan, you and I have both seen it, how much it's really a one-way street, that the founder and owner is serving the business, but not really getting their life back for it.
Yes. I love that. I think that's the perfect way to summarize that is, for the most part, we're all building businesses because we want that to support our life. And we get lost somewhere along the way and forget to have a life sometimes.
Yeah. And that the business is not our life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I like that. So I want to shift focus a little bit here and talk about one of your books. It's called Start Finishing. And at the core, it's really about how to actually do the work that matters. Not all of the work, but the work that matters. And one of the ways I think that a lot of business owners get in their own way is through procrastination. We use procrastination in a lot of different ways to avoid doing the real work. And how do you see this kind of playing out with your clients or the folks that you work with?
This is a great question. I want to sort of start it with a counterpoint here. Susan, what's your favorite dessert?
Cheesecake.
Cheesecake. How often do you procrastinate on eating cheesecake?
Not very.
Yeah. Mine is ice cream, right? And so the funny thing about this is we don't need like a major productivity system and accountability buddies and, all of the sort of things to make us eat ice cream or cheesecake. It's like there in front of us. We eat it. We wish we hadn't ate so much of it. We tell ourselves we're not going to do it next time. And so a lot of times when I start thinking about procrastination, I really want to get into the emotion of the particular work or activity, because if it were ice cream, you wouldn't be procrastinating. You wouldn't be thinking about it. So typically what we look at is the things we procrastinate on are the things that scare us the most. We think that it's actually about some cognitive sort of, I need to know the right answer, or I need to be smart or whatever. But I want to get to what is it about this particular thing that scares you, right? It could be you're procrastinating on letting something go because you're scared your teammates are going to screw it up, right? So that's a sort of thing right there. And underneath that fear of them screwing it up is how much money you'll lose. And, if we keep scratching at that, you'll be in the van down by the river, right? Or maybe, on the counter side to what I was saying, like what counter side meaning like when people are at that stage where they need to get themselves out of the bottlenecks, the fear and the thing that keeps them from doing the work that it takes to get there is often that like, what will my teammates think of me if I don't come in 5 days a week, right? Will they trust me? Will they like me? Will they think it's bullshit? Like, what's going on there? Now that's for stuff, and I want I want to bracket that. Those are for things that we don't just hate, right? Like a lot of us will procrastinate over doing bookkeeping because unless you're like a bookkeeper or maybe Susan, who the hell wants to do that? Right? That's not what you signed up for. It's like kind of like, Susan, you'll get where I'm coming from here. It's like, on all the sort of like sign up for the military commercials, they don't show folks like spending days shining boots and cleaning weapons and, on KP. They don't show that, right? You get to do all the cool stuff. Well, in the business sense, there's all this sort of like shining and sort of work that you got to do that no one really wants to do. And so, I mean, I can understand problems of procrastination when it's just what I call dread work. You just don't want to do it, right? And in those scenarios, it's largely like getting real about the fact you only have a few options here, right? You can either do it, you can delete it, you can defer it, or you can delegate it. You got those 4Ds, hat tip, David Allen on those, right? And it's getting super quick about which one of those you're going to do and just owning that and doing it as quickly as possible, right? Or if, you are not certain, well, hold on, I'll pause here. I get excited in this place if you can't tell. We're really bad about creating artificial urgency for ourselves. Just as people. Creative people, even more so, right? Because we can think of we can create the 17 different reasons why we need to do something right now. And so part of our task as founders and people is, on the one hand, to not always be creating artificial urgency such that we live our lives with that sort of background anxiety that everyone who's a founder who's listened to me knows what I'm talking about, right? That's a lot of that is an amalgam of true urgency of like people really, really about to knock the door down versus your fear that if you don't do something, like something's going to happen in 2 or 3 days. So that's one sort of like stop creating so much of the artificial urgency, because the artificial urgency, one of the things that it does another thing that it does besides the anxiety piece is that it only reinforces that bootstrapper mindset and habit. So when it comes to the dread work, you have those 4Ds that I just mentioned there. I know now that you've revealed about my military background, I know what all of our creative founders will start to say about this. It's like, yeah, that works for y'all because you're military and you have discipline, but that's not me. Fast fact, a lot of people who were successful in the military did so despite discipline problems, right? So I'm one of those. Same. Right. People are like, Charlie, you get it because you're disciplined. I'm like, man, I work hard not to do a whole bunch of stuff, but
yes, it makes you very, I like to call it like you're a little bit of a lazy perfectionist. You figure out the laziest way to accomplish whatever it is that you need to accomplish.
Yeah, look, every productivity strategist and every real strategist, we balance that line between being lazy as possible, but also being control freaks. It's a very weird it's a very weird person to be. Line. Yeah. And so just understanding that work that you're not doing, that you're thinking about, that you're sort of hovering around, you're still putting emotional labor on that work. It's still clogging up resources that you could be using to solve the actual challenges of it. So for a lot of people, I used to be like, I have a nuance with like the first things first thing, and the swallow the frog first thing in the morning, which many people have heard. What I will say for most people it works is do every day, earlier in the day, do just at least one thing on that dread list. I call them frogs. Frog tasks are just those things that like they get hairier and wartier the longer you get there. It's also a reference to the Mark Twain, if you have to swallow a frog, do it first thing in the morning sort of thing. If you can just get into the habit of swallowing, if you're not the violent type, catching frogs, 2 or 3 a day earlier in the day, not first thing, but earlier in your workday, your life will be so much better because you won't end up in that place where you have so many of these things looking at you that you just can't think anymore. And you'll avoid the bad commitments that we often will make with ourselves. It's like, you know what? I'm going to batch them all into like this epic Friday thing. And then I'm just going to get through them all. Guess what? That Friday comes. You're not going to look forward to that Friday, and the odds are you're really not going to get through that list.
Nope.
And you're still going to beat yourself up, and you're still going to have the frogs. So how about let's not do that, right? So the best thing I could say for procrastination is, one, if it's on this sort of stuff that you don't hate, or it's not dread work, really get clear about what it is that scares you about it or makes you uncomfortable. and get into the story of the work, because once you untangle that, you'll be able to figure out what to do and how to go with that. And if it's just on the dread work sort of frog side of things, be in just constant flow with these, so that you don't get that backup. I really feel for folks who do the thing where they're like, you know what, Friday afternoon, I'm just going to take all afternoon and do email. Or whatever day that is, because I'm like, there could be a better way of doing that. Now, caveat, fundamentally do what works for you. If clearing out your Friday afternoon and doing all of your email and just getting it done really does work for you, then do that. Pay no attention to what I'm saying. But if what you're doing is not working, I invite you to do something different.
I like that. So I think this is maybe related, but you also talked about finding momentum in your business and how it's really hard to gain momentum and very easy to lose momentum. And that's also kind of one of the ways that business owners get in their own way. They kind of step off the tracks just before that roller coaster is about to kind of finally roll downhill. And then they start losing momentum because they're self-sabotaging. Either the light gets too bright on them, or, right at that point where they actually do start to get traction, they just stop. They do something to derail the train. So how do you see that kind of playing out, and how do you counteract that?
Oh, that's a great question. So let's start with why we do that, before we go into what to fix. And it's top of mind now that that I know you have a military background. There's a way military folks describe things, y'all, and you're hearing this, like, what's going on? Why is that happening? And then what can we do to fix it? Right.
Yeah,
that's always the way that we work through things. And so bear with us, because we always have to tell you, here's why that happens, so that the solutions that we're going to give have context. I think, I wrote about this in Start Finishing. There are 3, I actually wish I would have made it 4 no-win scenarios. And so since I get to do that, there are 4 no-win scenarios we end up telling ourselves that really create that pattern where we step off right before success. We step off right before we've made it into the promised land, and then keep ourselves in the thrash. The first one is that success is going to wreck your relationships. So if you're successful, then, and I'll put this in the context of a founder, if your business takes off and you've already been running as hard as you can do, and it takes off and goes to that next level, it's going to swallow you whole, and you're not going to see your family, friends, loved ones, and communities for like the next 3 years. Right. And then your wife is going to leave you. Your kids are going to hate you, and you'll end up in a van down by the river. Right.
It always ends in a van down by the river. I don't know why, but
look, y'all, hopefully Susan will link to it if you don't know what we're talking about. But so many, we half joking here, but so many of our founder stories terminate with van down by the river. And
they always do.
And it's super funny. It's like, here's how we think about this. And if I'm saying this, and when I say it out loud, if it sounds absurd, I get that. But it's actually how we, I would say, think about it. But it's how we feel our way and grope our way through these situations. What we do, Susan, is we think success is going to take us a long, long, long time to get, right? It's a bunch of, decades and a bunch of decisions, so on and so forth. But one mistake, van down by the river.
Yep.
Right? We don't assume those possibilities of like, actually there might be 2 or 3 things that I can do there. I get success tomorrow, right? We most of us can't imagine that story. But that one bad decision, van down by the river, man, so many of us have that one. And so here's what I want to say about that. Unless it is a character mistake, there is not one tactical mistake that is going to put you down in the van down by the river. It's just not going to happen, right? Now, the character mistakes, lying, cheating, and stealing, and those types of things, those will get you there pretty quickly, right? So you get like this wide range of tactical mistakes, and I want you to embrace those, because you have to learn, just like we learn how to live by living, we learn how to do business and to succeed at business by doing business and succeeding at business. There is no other way. That also means a lot of mistakes. That also means a lot of that. But as long as you're not on the character side of things, lying, cheating, stealing, saying things that aren't true, fraud, those types of things, you're going to be fine. There is no van down by the river. So mindset piece I would want to leave people with is, what if What if there was no van down by the river scenario? What if that was impossible for you? How would that change how you approach growing your business and how you think about your role in your business? And if you really take it seriously, it unlocks some things for people because they realize how much they've been hanging on to. That founder's mojo has just been gripping that wheel so tightly because van down by the river. What if that just wasn't there? What if you couldn't fail in a way that really mattered? It opens up a lot of different possibilities. The other question, sort of mindset questions that I'll also ask people here is, what would you do if there were no right answer? And the reason I ask that one is because so many people get stuck and they get off the treadmill. They get off the pathway of success because right as they get to the edge of it, they're like, but what if this isn't the right thing? What if this is like the wrong thing and I'm making a huge mistake? And what if, right? But what if there were just a range of options, some better than others, but there was no like one right option out there in the world that, is the boogeyman under the bed that's going to pop up once you make a decision or once you do something? What would that change for you? Playing with those two questions from a mindset piece works really well for folks because I think it dislodges the way in which we anchor into the business and entrench certain ways of doing things that keeps us from finding the true growth pathways in our business, most of which we can't see when we start the business. Some of which we can't even see when we're in the business because, it's hard to read the label when you're stuck inside the jar.
I like that.
The other 3 no-win scenarios we'll create for ourselves are, the second one is being successful will cost me my character. Like nice guys finish last, rich, wealthy people are scumbags and have cheated people, real artists starve, like all of those sort of things we tell ourselves about how people who are successful are somehow disintegrous or they're unethical people. Ergo, if we become successful at a wild level, if we sell our business, we've screwed our employees. If I hear that one more time, I will lose it. Or, if I set my teammate up for success and they can do things without me, and I'm not working, then I'm just that person that's profiting off of other people's work. And that makes me a bad person. Just all those sort of stories that pop up. So that's the second no-win scenario. Third no-win scenario is if I'm successful, I'll set a precedent that I'll never be able to live up to again. And that's a far fall from grace. It's kind of like if you were a middle schooler. And I say middle schooler because this is where so many of these stories really, really entrench, where it's like you're an okay student, but like that first time you made an A+ or you knocked something out of the park, and then that's what you had to live up against the rest of your time, right? And it creates a lot of pressure, especially because of the relationship between sort of the hyper-creative, hyper-intuitive people who become founders have had an experience like that to where they were just able to generate something super quickly, and it did incredibly well. They didn't necessarily know how they did it, but now all of a sudden they had to live up against that. And if they did something that was less than that, then what are they and who are they? And like it created this whole pathway for them. So that's the third no-win scenario. And the fourth one is success will cost me my health, my sanity, or my soul. It's different than the second one, but it's just like I will have to rake my bones. I will do all those types of things. I don't want to do it. Like I don't want to be successful because I want to be in shape. Look at that reality that you created there. So those are sort of the 4 patterns that we get to that get us off of right as we're about to be successful. We're like, I don't want the downside of that no-win scenario. I don't want to get wealthy enough that then people question my integrity. So yeah, I got to do something about that, right? And we resolve it. Fundamentally, we resolve these no-win scenarios by shooting for mediocrity, where we're neither really winning, but we're also not failing. Right? Because then no one really will come after us, right? We're not really one of those rich people. We're doing okay, right? Okay is safe, right? Like we sort of shoot for this middle gap here that keeps us in this continual pendulum between groove and grind. And every founder I know knows that that's a very thin line between when you're just in your groove and things are working and you could sink into it. And then that random Monday, something didn't work and you're back in the grind, right? So the first thing that you can do when you start to see that you're reaching that point of like self-destructing your success, things like that, is really look at whether you're playing to some of those no-win scenarios. Is it really that you're backing away because you think that what you're doing will create, will cross across a hypocrisy line that you feel it will make you a bad person? Is that what's going on? Is it that if you hire a manager to come in and take care of your business, that person that's been in the manager position but hasn't been doing it well is, who's also your sister-in-law, is going to like come after you or be upset about that? Like, really get clear about what one of those stories are there, or is it just one of those things where you got some version that success ends up in a van down by the river story?
So we're kind of running out of time a little bit. I want to make sure we can wrap it up. I think that was a good place to kind of stop. But is there anything you think that we should talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
What I would say on this one is embracing and appreciating how long it takes small businesses to grow. One of the frustrations that I see, and one of the sort of things that will trip so many founders up, is their expectation that success should be overnight. And they don't mean like overnight. They like, I get that it's not going to be tomorrow, Charlie, but like 3 months from now. Okay. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, really, Susan may disagree with me on this one, but the first 3 or 4 years of your business, the reality is you have no idea what you're doing. And most of the work is to figure out what the hell you're doing. So you will get lucky. You will have some lucky streaks. There will be things that take off. But like those first 3 years, just understand that that's what it is. You're, broadly speaking, the next 3 to 7 years are going to be, now that you know what you're doing and who you're doing it for and what your business actually is and who you need, you'll spend that time sort of building systems and processes and positioning and people to do that work. Then 7+ years, you start looking at different things of expansion, amplifying things like that. And that's a rough model. I know different businesses are going to grow at different rates, but my main point here is be thinking in like 3 to 5 year projects or growth cycles, and not, where you're going to be next year or, next month, because I think that's what feeds so much of that, counterproductive hyper creativity and action that happens with small businesses.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. That 3-year mark seems to be pretty consistent. Like everybody up to that point, every once in a while before that, you think you got it. You may have a few like, oh, I think I got it parts, like you're talking about small wins, but really you're right. Like the first 3 years are trying to figure out who you are as a business, who you work with, what you do. And then after that, it feels like it's more consistent. So where can our listeners find you if they want to connect or learn more about what you do?
Well, y'all, I've already heard that I'm lazy, so I don't have too many different websites to go to, right? So all of my work can be found at Productive Flourishing. We have tools for founders and small business owners. We also have a lot of great tools that help people be more productive, more effective, and more proactive. So again, that's not Founders Mojo. That's productiveflourishing.com. And if you want to hear more about the book that I've recently written, it's called Start Finishing. You could find that at startfinishingbook.com. P.S. That's just a redirect back to the landing page on my website. So those are the best 2 places. Twitter is also another great place. Charlie Gilkey.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Procrastination is often a symptom and not necessarily a cause of founders getting in their own way. Lots of times, procrastination happens because we're just plain scared. Scared of doing important work. Scared of putting ourselves out there, or scared of having to do the next thing. So I've started a little routine for myself. Every afternoon now, when I'm doing my weekly review, I go through my list of tasks and projects that I had originally planned on doing that week that, just didn't happen. And I'm looking at them and trying to figure out why each task didn't happen. Did I just overload my plate and expect too much from myself? Did my priorities shift and this thing that I thought was important just isn't anymore? Should this task not have been on my list in the first place and I can just delete it? Or am I actually procrastinating the task? For me, when I start to notice I'm procrastinating something now, I'm trying to be more proactive about asking myself, Why? Am I unsure of what to do? Have I not broken the task down into small enough chunks? Am I afraid of the task? Or afraid of the thing that I have to do after that task? That's helping me identify my own roadblocks, and maybe it'll help you zero in on yours. As you may have noticed throughout this series, lots of the ways that founders get in their own way are actually rooted in fear. It was a really consistent theme with almost every guest I talked to. There are tons of different ways that this shows up for each of us and gets in our own way. So if you keep running into a wall somewhere or feeling like you're facing the same problem over and over, a good place to start to figure out what's happening is to start looking at yourself and ask yourself, what are you afraid of? And if you're still having a hard time identifying what's holding you back from doing your most important work, or if you're still just feeling like you're stuck being busy and you want some support, I'm here to help. In just 1 week, I'll create your custom action plan. I'll identify what's holding you and your business back and figure out some quick win opportunities to help your business run more effectively. I'll share my recommendations for your finances, people, operations, software, and more. And we'll get rid of those last few, but I'm so busy excuses, so you can move on to doing the work that matters. Want to find out more? Go to scalespark.co/action plan or shoot me an email at susan@scalespark.co to schedule a free call today. Break the Ceiling is produced by Yellow House Media. Our production coordinator is Sean McMullen. This episode was edited by Marty Seefeld with production assistance by Kristen Roundbeck.